Amongst the sectors that need attention in the country, education is one of them. Nigeria seems to be retrogressing in all aspects of education and skills acquisition. The nation's education sector has been bedeviled with long years of strike action embarked by lecturers forcing students to stay home for long periods. Over time, a combination of these strikes, brain drain and education tourism, disagreement over funding and tuition model have contributed greatly to reduction in the education standards in Nigeria. So what are the solutions to addressing Nigeria's education deficits? Joining us to discuss this is Bolaji Abdullahi, former Commissioner for Education in Kwara State and former Minister of Sports. Good morning, Mr. Abdullahi, and welcome to the morning show.
Morning, Bolaji Abdullahi.
Good morning.
Good to see you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us quickly. I know our main focus is education, but I want to take you back to your book, On a Platter of Gold, How Jonathan Won and Lost Nigeria. It's been 8 years since then. Your book was published in 2018. So if we were to look back now, as the Buhari administration begins to wind down, will you say how Buhari won and gained Nigeria? Or you talk about how Buhari won and lost Nigeria also, particularly with regard to two constituencies that are very important to you, education and sports, where you were minister?
Well, I mean, thank you very much, Dr. Abati. Regarding the On a Platter of Gold, the book that you referenced, my book, the book was conceived or written in the context of President Jonathan's almost unprecedented popularity at the point of contesting election or at the point of becoming the president of Nigeria, and how that popularity was steadily depleted over the years due to a combination of factors. So what I tried to do was to question how a widely popular man with the kind of humble background that he had could then become, at a point, the most abused president in the country. So that was what I tried to do. So in the context of losing the 2015 general election. Regarding President Buhari, the question of how he became, his own tenure will be interpreted in the context of the expectation that Nigerians had. I was part of that process of promoting change, and we said we were going to deliver change to Nigeria. Now the question is how, looking back in the last 8 years, how much of that change had been delivered. And to zero in on the education sector, I would say that not much has changed. In the last couple of months, we still saw reports that said 76% of Nigerian children cannot read between the age of 8 and 14. And almost 90% of children who sit for the WAEC examination still don't meet the minimum requirement for career progression. And of course, the most reported one, about 10.3 million children who are still out of school. So on the indices of enrollment, in terms of and learning accomplishments, not much progress has been made in the last 8 years. As a matter of fact, the difference with the previous administration was that they were trying to know all the assessments that were carried out in this country in terms of measuring children learning ability were carried out before this administration of President Buhari. So we still had something to look at and say, okay, if this is not working, then what do we do? But the problem is still as they are, for different reasons. One of the most important things I would say is how do you even get education on the political agenda? When you are introducing programs, you say it's the most important sector. But getting it on the political agenda and make it a priority of government. I was in government when it was reported that 90% of children who sat for WAEC failed. But it wasn't an issue at the Federal Executive Council. Dr. Abati, you were there. It was never discussed. So even getting it on the political agenda is a big issue. So here we are.
All right. You said 10.3 million children out of school, but as at 2022, UNICEF, that number has increased to almost double at over 18%. 18 million children are out of school in Nigeria. So under this administration, the number has increased. But beyond that is we talk about it being a very critical aspect of the nation, but budgetary allocation doesn't reflect that. Political will under this administration, and you might argue this, doesn't reflect that. The attention that has been given to education in the last 8 years hasn't reflected that. What do you think? Because we're moving on to a new administration, so beyond evaluating this current administration, what should the next administration do in terms of priority areas to improve the education sector in Nigeria?
I think the issue goes beyond one particular line of intervention. Yes, you mentioned funding. Funding is a big issue. But funding has to be measured from two dimensions. One is the effectiveness of the funding. Are you funding enough? The second one is the efficiency. Are you funding the right factors that could lead to the right learning outcomes? So on the two sides, Nigeria is not doing very well. Now, if you ask me what the new administration needs to do, they need to take a holistic review of the sector and look at those things that can be done as quickly as possible. Anything short of a holistic review is not going to be enough. Let's take basic education, for example. Why are we not spending the money on basic education right from the school? You know, because the school is the place where you expect the results. But the schools don't have any input into how budgets for basic education is made. So that has to change. I mean, the Constitution says that the responsibility for basic education is the local government responsibility. But that happens only in nominal terms. Local government almost play no role in terms of managing and running basic education. It stops at the state level. And now that we're talking about the autonomy of local government, Nigeria has to ask, do we want to leave the most important aspect of our education to the weakest tier of government? That is the knotty issue that Nigeria will have to resolve. My solution is that you have to make the schools a major entity for funding education. So the budget coming from the schools is what will go to the SUBEB and go to the UBEC and all that. So the restructuring needs to happen. That is one. Two, we've been running this 6334 for a while now. The philosophy behind the 6334 is that when children complete the first 9 years of basic education, then you can stream them to either go for vocation and technical colleges, or they go on the academic line, go on to senior secondary school. But we all know that that is not happening at the moment. So children enter from JS1, automatically they continue to SS3. So why are we still making children sit going to secondary school for 6 years? Why are we still keeping them in school for 6 years? We don't have the technical colleges. So we have to ask ourselves questions. Should we continue to make 3 years a terminal point for basic education? Do we want children to continue up to Form 5? Then those who want to go on to university can then spend the extra year doing matriculation. Then you will say they have graduated with matriculation. So these are policy issues that can be reviewed, can be looked at. Because what we have done over the years is somebody say, okay, 6334, the philosophy behind it is not being met, but we still persisted in this 6334. So as it appears to me that all we do now at the secondary school level is just preparing children to sit for JAMB examination, rather than making them functional citizens. You know, so that question needs to be answered by the new administration, and they need to communicate it early enough. I will see a situation that within the first 100 days, the new administration will take a National Educational Reform Act to the National Assembly that will look at the entire education sector in a holistic form, not only the funding, but also the governance and the infrastructure and all that, who plays what role. Okay. There are some areas where government need to play less role, need to step back. University education, for example, the federal government need to step back, you know, and allow it to run differently, you know. So we cannot exhaust all this, but it is about time that Nigeria realizes that if we don't put education in the front burner of whatever we are doing, there will be no future for this country. The reason people put their children in school is so that they can improve their earning capacity and contribute meaningfully to the economy. But if you are not educating children, if you are not giving them skills, then the country is not going anywhere, you know.
Okay. And I mean, like you very well put it, I think predominantly the problem is even the structure of funding, even with the primary education. And that's why a lot of people are even beginning to think about, apart from UBEC and SUBEC, why can't we start looking at the possibility for endowment for primary school and having a trust at which we run primary schools? Because it will interest you to know that one part a lot of Nigerians don't talk about, that's the most critical part, is primary school completion rate, which is going to less than 50% as we speak today, of the population do not even complete primary school. So a lot more people are not even completing the basic first school leaving certificate, primary 6. And you see, if you check the population of Nigeria today, a lot of people don't have those basic school, first school leaving certificate of primary 6 any longer because they're not completing primary schools. So how can we show up primary school completion rate, number one? Number two, how can we use endowment across the educational value system? Number three, what is going to be your idea around the constant conundrum around ASU and the federal government that has lingered on for over 30 years, if my memory serves me right? I think at some point Babangida, President Ibrahim Babangida had to ban ASU at a point when they went on the strike, and this was about 30 years ago. So how do we solve that conundrum?
Well, you mentioned two things regarding basic education, the issue of completion and enrollment, how many children are going through schools and how many are actually completing. But the most important factor to me is not even a question of enrollment. Enrollment is important, completion is important. It's whether children are actually learning in those schools. From my experience, I've seen children who were completing primary 6 years of primary education who could not write their own names. I've seen it, right? And if you go to some other states like Sokoto and Bauchi, every single assessment that has been done showed that 95% of children who are completing schools in those places cannot read basic passages that you expect that children, 10-year-old, 14-year-old should be able to read. So for me, the most important is whether children are actually learning, because schooling is one thing, education is another thing. You can be schooling without giving education. So all we are doing is that we are enrolling children. As a matter of fact, since UBE was launched about 20 years ago, we have had more children attending schools than at any other point in our history. But the question is, despite the 10 or 18 million that are still out of school, but the point is that, are these children learning? In this country today, the only hope of children getting education are for those children whose parents are able to pay for private tutoring, and that is not good enough. So what we need to do, we have run the UBE system for over 20 years through the Universal Basic Education Commission. We need to revisit that act. We need to look at the reason we set up the Universal Basic Education and whether the objectives are being met. In Nigeria, once you set up something, whether it's working or not, you continue to do it because they have vested interest in ensuring that the status quo is maintained. But the new administration must have the courage to say, listen, we've run this for over 20 years. The agenda when we're setting it up was to get children into school, to introduce mass education in the country. After 22 years, we need to ask ourselves, how come the average Nigerian child, 10-year-old, cannot read? It means we are not doing the right thing. So we have to refocus the Universal Basic Education Commission. At the moment, the Universal Basic Education is functioning like a fund management organization. 2% of the consolidated revenue, that's what they manage, rather than ensuring that the national objectives for basic education are being met. The commission itself needs to be refocused. We need to ask ourselves what exactly is the role we want it to play and allow those definitions to cascade down to the smallest unit, which is the schools themselves.
I get all of this.
Very clear. Why are private schools performing better?
I get all of these points. But you were Commissioner of Education in Kwara State, right? We keep talking about incoming administration. As a man who has managed education, science, and technology at the state level, what will you be saying to state governments as this country moves forward? And you have a mentorship program, the Bolaji Abdullahi mentorship program. Is there a place in all of this education, framework for mentors going forward?
Well, thank you, Dr. Abati. When I was Commissioner for Education many years ago, that was 2007 to 2011, I was shocked with what I found out, that majority of the children who were completing primary education could not read basic texts. you know, and to even compound it, the teachers that were teaching them also, most of them don't have the requisite competencies to teach those children because the education system that produced them was also faulty, you know. But the intervention that we introduced at that time supported the argument that the most important element in the delivery of learning in basic education is the quality of teachers and the quality of teaching. And that's where Nigeria has to go back and ask itself questions. Are we attracting the right kind of people into teaching? If we are not, why? Why are we not attracting the right kind of people into teaching? 2, why are we not keeping them in the classroom? The answers to these questions are very clear. But what we need to do to solve them are not so straightforward, but they can be done. You know, the most brilliant in other countries recruit the most brilliant among them to teach. In our country is those who cannot find any other thing to do that go into teaching. So we have to create a package of incentives that attract the right kind of people into teaching. If we don't get teaching right, you can spend all the money on infrastructure, build classrooms that look like Transcorp Hotel or this hotel. You know, you cannot get anywhere unless you get the quality of teaching right. And that is why Nigeria has to ask the grade. Some people have said that we need to bring back the grade two teaching, the teacher training colleges. We need to do this and that. For me, we are spending so much money, and that's tied back to the issue of university. We are spending so much money subsidizing university education. But what I think the federal government should be spending money on is subsidizing the production of teachers, the right quality of teachers. And you can't overproduce teachers. If Philippines can be supplying caterers to the world, why can't Nigeria supply teachers to the world if you think you stand a risk of overproducing? So, but I think Nigeria needs to focus on the production of the teachers, the right kind of teachers, and we need to pay salaries that is commensurate to what is earned in other sectors to keep those people in teaching. So it's a decision that is not so politically contentious and can be easily dealt with. And I mentioned the issue of ASU earlier. I mean, I think one of the Rufai was asked me the question of on ASU. I mean, you are right. This ASU thing has gone on for too long. It's a national embarrassment, like everyone has said. But I think the people in the university themselves have to be honest and ask themselves, why are we persisting this way? Do we really want this ASU problem to be solved? Because it can be solved if we want it to be solved. The new administration needs to do something now. What are those promises and obligations? What are those things that were owed to ASU? You need to negotiate with them and pay it off and start on a clean slate. Whatever government has owed them in the past, let government pay. Whatever promises government has made, let government meet those promises and start on a clean slate. But going forward, government must be able to draw a line and say, you want autonomy? Okay, we give you autonomy. Every university, you now become a self-governing establishment that must earn its own money to run itself. Every university should be able to hire its own lecturers and negotiate salaries with them and decides how much they want to pay them. There's no point in university, there's no sense in the University of Lagos, for example, paying the same salary as a university in Damatru with due respect. But or the reason a university, a lecturer, a professor teaching artificial intelligence should be paid the same salary as a professor teaching maybe. We
have just about 2 minutes.
I don't know, to go. Maybe one of these.
We have just about 2 minutes to go. I wanted you to talk about.
The point I'm making is that we need to have.
I wanted you to talk about mentorship.
Okay, yeah, the mentorship, what we try to do with the mentorship thing, you know, of course, you don't have a politician. I've tried to contest election and all that. But what I've tried to do is to say that, look, we shouldn't wait until we occupy political offices before we do what is necessary. The issue of youth development is very dear to my heart. And I believe that one of the major challenges that young people are facing in this country is that at the critical stage in their life, they are not able to get the right kind of support that they need. They are asking themselves a lot of questions. Why are things the way they are? They are trying to find their ways in life. But there are no sufficient support system for those, and that's why we set up the mentorship program. And I'm excited to find so many of them coming back after the program to say, look, if not for that program, I would have not. So many of them have gone on to finish with first class. Many of them are in very great professions now. So, and for me, the argument in support of that is that no effort is too small. I mean, when we started, it was very small. We were not taking more than 30 young people across this country for a period of 6 months, and we exposed them to different experiences. And it's making incredible impact, and it doesn't require a lot of money also. You know, so what I'm saying this to encourage other people that we can, in our respective role, we don't have to occupy an office. In our respective role, we can do things that can deliver significant impact to Nigeria. This is our country. We need to continue to do whatever we can, you know, to help Nigeria in our respective capacity. And that's why we did what we're doing.
Well, we don't have enough time because we just 1 minute, but I'd like your statement. The final thing I was just going to ask was around curriculum. I raised this because yesterday UNESCO highlighted the fact that we're still using our curriculum that's been on for 40 years. So it's not just access to education or those who start school and don't finish it. The quality of what they get in schools is also a big problem. So you talked about teachers, but how about the curriculum development as well?
You are quite right. I mean, when I was commissioner, I was astonished when I started and I saw children were being made to take 17 subjects or something.
Yeah.
And I said, no, this is not right. The purpose of basic education is to produce literate children who can read, who can write, and who can do simple mathematics. So why are we teaching them all these 17 subjects? So, and we cut them down to 7. And 7 because you have to do the politics of religion, language, and whatever. But I also ensure that 70% of teaching time is dedicated to reading, writing, and arithmetic. And it made tremendous impact. You see, we have to go back and ask ourselves, why are we doing what we are doing? Why are we sending children to basic education? You know, so all these, you see a village that don't even have electricity, they say they are teaching ICT. The teacher himself has never seen a computer before. So why are we wasting these children's time? You know, so we need to, I agree with you, UNESCO is right, we need to review the curriculum. We don't need all these 17 subjects that we are torturing children on and wasting everybody's time. So these are part of the reform that need to happen. There is a whole range of activities that are interconnected, and somebody has to sit on top of it and have a global view of what needs to be done, because they're all connected in an ecosystem that one action in one sector, at one level, have an immediate impact or consequence for the other level. It's not something we can exhaust, like you said, in the short time that we have. But those who have the responsibility in this next dispensation need to think of it in this holistic manner. Well,
thank you very much, Bolaji Abdullahi, former Commissioner for Education, Kwara State, former Minister of Youth and Sports Development of Nigeria. Thank you for joining us.